Alright guys, welcome to 4.6 Savage. Now today I wanted to explain the difference between non-PI and PI. A lot of Mustang owners, well, 2-valve 4.6 Mustang owners, have the question, should I PI swap, should I not? What are the benefits, what are the downsides? I'll go over those today. Now, first of all, Rose is PI swapped. To me, I just bit the bullet because there is a downside to it. But we'll get to that later. Non-PI and PI. You start off with non-PI, which was the early 4.6s. These came out before 99. And the 4.6 was first made in, I think, 91. I think it came in the Lincoln Town Car. So from 91 to 99, well, some 4.6s and 99 were non-PI. There are instances where there are just a couple that had non-PI heads in 99, but they're rare. Anyway, so basically non-PI is the heads. The heads and the cams. Well, now that I say that, the intake is also smaller. Non-PI has smaller ports, produces lower compression, and has smaller intake runners, such as these. This is a PI manifold though. Now the PI counterpart, 99 and above 4.6s, those had bigger valves in them, bigger intake. Now you also had higher compression due to the fact that the combustion chambers were smaller. Non-PI was a 50, I think it was 51 cc head, or you have the PI version, which is a 42 cc head. But there's where you get into your performance aspect, but we'll talk about that later. The PI cams also had higher lift due to the way the heads are set up. They decided to add more lift but take away some duration. So the non-PI cams make more torque, but the PI cams make more horsepower on the PI setup. You make like 15 foot-pounds more, I think, in the range with non-PI cams on PI heads. But that being said, the boost with the PI cams is just worth it all around. Now, when you swap the heads, there is a difference between the pistons of the non-PI block and the PI block. Both 4.6s have dishes in them, but the non-PI block have smaller dishes which increase your compression ratio. This is why the PI heads make power. Because of the smaller combustion chamber, it creates a 10:5 to 1 compression ratio. This forces you to run premium gas. You can get away with 89, and if your tune's real good, it'll do well, but 91 to 93 is what you should be running. Now, a lot of people, like I did when I first got it, was a PI intake swap. You were able to swap the intake to the non-PI heads just by filling in some of the ports and kind of port matching the gaskets and making them seal around the head. And this is gains up to 10 to 15 horsepower sometimes. I mean, I could definitely feel the difference with the intake. A little bit more low end, a lot more high end. It breathes a lot better. But I noticed when I did the heads were the absolute best thing you can do to the 4.6. 4.6s respond extremely well to higher compression. This is why they do better with boost. You can run high levels of boost on them and they not even break a sweat. Now, when I did the swap, I went ahead and did my chain and tensioners and made sure everything was timed correctly. And everything, I also put GT500 follows in it. This is they are followers that are stronger and promote less valve deflection. And they also reduce valve train weight. This gives you slightly higher RPM range, and it also gives you less valve deflection, which means your valves open a little bit more than with the stock followers. This gives you a slight bit more power. Not noticeable, but just a slight bit. Now, the PI heads, there's two different versions of the 4.6 engine. There's the Romeo, which is my engine right here. Romeos will always have the oil fill on this side. Windsors have it over here. Now, you can, but you need the head changing kit. That requires you to swap Windsor heads to Romeo or Romeo to Windsor. It's more time consuming, so it's better just to buy your heads for your car, you know. Buy Romeo heads for a Romeo engine, you know, type thing. And this makes it a lot easier during your swap. It makes things very easy to deal with. Now, the increase in horsepower is like 40 to 60 with the head swap, and this is with doing the cams and the intake and everything together. There are small tidbits of things you need, like this plate here for the alternator. There's also a coolant crossover tube that has to be bought for so you can hook up your intake manifold, well, under the tube from the water pump underneath the intake manifold to the heater core. And most of this comes with, if you buy a kit offline. I decided not to buy a kit offline. I decided to piece together myself. I pulled the intake manifold from a Crown Vic, and I got the heads from a 2001 Bullet. And I also just pulled the crossover tube and bent it myself from the Crown Vic. But there really are no downsides other than running premium gas to the PI heads. I kept my MPG. I was getting like 20 miles per gallon, and I still got 20 miles per gallon after I did the head swap. The power increase is amazing. You notice it so much more, it pulls so much harder, and the sound, it changes the whole sound of the car. Now, if I would go like I did, I have Autolite, I think they're 764s. They are they're copper plugs, but they're made for the PI swaps, because the PI swap runs, it's basically a slightly colder plug than the regulars. So I run that, and I noticed a difference in idle quality, but that could also be because the heads, my heads were, the valve seals were leaking, and I had a lot of issues. So basically it helped me. Everything else that I did, is just, I cleaned the intakes. I basically reworked the heads, made the valves clean, all that. Relapped them in there. New spring, the springs that came with the PI heads, and reworked the cams, basically, made sure they were clean, cleaned up the journals. And that does, you guys don't understand how much that does help for these cars. They're old by this time. It's been about it's been over a decade that most of these 4.6s are out. They've got a lot of miles on them. When you clean stuff up, it's going to give you a lot more power. Now, I decided to go the PI heads because I'm a all-motor type person. I like to have power without having to run a supercharger. So, because the PI heads raise your compression ratio, it makes it harder later down the road to run high boost, because you start to run into the problem of the higher compression ratio and it not being able to run pump gas. So that was kind of my turning point. It makes you make that decision if you want to run boost or not. But that being said, because the bigger valves in the PI heads, your boost is more effective. You're able to get the air out and back in a lot quicker than you would be with non-PI counterparts. That being said, headers make the world of difference once you have the PI swap. It pulls the exhaust out with the PI, the huge PI valves. I mean, you could see the difference. I used to have my old heads, but you could see the difference between the PI ports and the non-PI ports. And it's just one of those things where you have to decide where you're going with your build, because you don't want to spend money. Now for me, the heads, I overpaid for the heads, but the whole setup really cost me around $800, because I paid like $225 for the heads. I paid for this intake here, I paid like $25 at the junkyard, and the rest was, it was like $200 and something for the tensioners, and I did new lifters and new rockers, or all followers. Because it's an overhead cam engine, they're not called rockers, they're called followers. Just so not to confuse anyone. That's why I said that, because technically they're rockers, but they're followers because it's on a overhead cam engine. Well, that's all I got for this video, guys. Just remember, be savage.